Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas visiting with Sammy K. Smith from Spring Hill Farm. Good morning.
Good morning.
Spring Hill Farm, one of my favorite places to visit, and yet I still think to some it's a hidden gem.
It is.
How would you describe it?
So we are a privately funded nonprofit. Our big claim to fame is that we were a station on the Underground Railroad in the 1820s. So that's really what we tend to focus on. But the house has seen over 150 years of history, local, statewide, national, international, that we try to focus on.
Tell us a little bit about that history.
Sure. So the house was built in approximately 1821. Unfortunately, nobody wrote down and said, hey, we finished building our house today. So we don't have the exact date. But we believe it's about 1821 by the Roach Wales families. And for those of you from Massillon, yes, the last name is pronounced Roach, not
Yes, it
Roch.
is. Right.
But the family really settled Western Stark County, started all of the little townships that kind of came up out of that. Kendall was there first and inspired other people to come into this part of the country. They're really living on the edge of the frontier for a very long time. And after that, we just have years and years of the Wales family who gives back to their community. They're huge advocates, both families, on education and agricultural reform and equality.
I think people who've grown up here know the name Charity Roach. They know the name Arvine Wales. Who were these people?
Who were they? That is a question we sometimes still ask ourselves. It's hard to get a grasp on a person when you're 200 years removed.
Right.
But they were amazing people for their time. Charity Roach is somebody I love to talk about, and she's a woman who's decades, if not centuries, ahead of her time in terms of equality and wanting to make sure that everyone gets a good education, not just sons of wealthy landowners. And it's phenomenal the amount of work that they do. And I know Charity and Thomas passed those same ideals down to Arvine Wales, who had worked for them for many years, and he passes it down to his family.
So he worked for them and then he bought the house?
Yes. After their deaths, he purchases the house. Thomas and Charity did not have any children. They had one son when they were living in Connecticut, and he died when he was only 5 months old.
Oh, dear.
Yes. But really, they kind of adopt Arvine Wales as their own son because his entire family's on the East Coast. And the same with his first wife, Mary Kimberly. She was an orphan. And just the way that they write about each other is obviously that they've kind of created their own family.
Take us inside the home. We find beautiful furnishings, and it's just so neat to go from room to room and discover little treasures here and there. Every time you visit, you see something new.
Oh, every time I walk in, I still find something new.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about where did all of that come from? Was that theirs, or you're picking up pieces as you go?
Most of our collection is from the Roach Wales families.
Wow.
So we're very lucky to have that. A lot of places, even a lot of presidential homes, they do a phenomenal job, but you don't always have what was left by the family. And that's something that we're very lucky to have. Anything that's not from the family is either period appropriate or is something that was donated to us by other families from Massillon who were occasionally their cousins, occasionally their relations through marriage. So we have a lot of things that are of the era. The difficult part we have is that because we were lived in for 150 years, up to 1973, the house was lived in. And so people go, oh, well, is this all original? And I go, yeah, but not 1820s original.
Right.
So we've been very lucky to have as much as we do. The other thing that's unique about us is we're just a farmhouse. We're not the great mansions or anything like that. So you're really seeing the family was wealthy, but they're not living ostentatiously. You're seeing kind of what the average person would have been living like.
Well, and as one of the people back in 73 that was still invited to that house when people were still living in it, you're exactly right. Mm-hmm. This was a family that made sure their children were raised with to live modestly mm-hmm. and to give back to your community and to have very strong values.
Yes.
And just great salt of the earth people. Mm-hmm. At what point then did they decide, help me remember, that, okay, now we're going to give this home to the community?
Well, that really comes from Irene McLean Wales. And she's a phenomenal woman. She married into the family. And she's the one who discovers that this house was part of the Underground Railroad and that the family that she married into really helped settle Western Stark County. So when she was actually still living in the house, she opened it up for tours. My board president remembers coming through the house when he was in second grade.
Yeah.
While she's still living there.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found this out the other day, that's how his earliest memories of this home, which is phenomenal, in my opinion, that there's people who still remember the family living there.
Oh, yes. She was a grandmother of a very good friend.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, she's phenomenal. But she's really the one who starts opening the house up as a place of Massillon history. And when Irene passed away in 1973, she helped put the home into what was then called the Massillon Museum Foundation. We are not, and not even then, related to the Massillon Museum, besides being really awesome friends mm-hmm. and community partners that work together a lot.
Yes.
However, we are two separate organizations, and she really did a lot to get us started. We owe almost everything to her.
How did they find out that it was part of the Underground Railroad? I know there's a lot of places that say, we think we were mm-hmm. or we hope we were, but they really know they were. Spring Hill was part of it. Yes.
Yeah. We were lucky enough when Irene was actually working on the property when she was first married, they found what we call the Roach Wales papers. And those are at the Massillon Public Library. They have all of the paperwork, and they have an archivist who has spent years going through them. This woman knows more than I can ever hope to know. But it was through those papers that we discovered these things. We discovered a letter that was written. We do not have this letter, unfortunately. We haven't been able to find it, but it was copied and printed. And we have the returning letter from Charity to one of her sisters talking about their work. We have an oral history that was written down for one of the witnesses of our job on the Underground Railroad. And we've been lucky enough to have a letter actually from a freedom seeker who came through Spring Hill, wow. George Duncan. So we're very lucky to have that. We have definitive proof. And honestly, we now know what happened to George and Edie Duncan. So we're even more lucky because we know where they came from. We know what happened to them.
Well, before I ask anything else, I need to know what happened to them. What happened to George and Edie Duncan?
George and Edie were freedom seekers who came from Wheeling, West Virginia at the time. They came through Spring Hill separately, and George's letter's actually writing back asking for help getting Edie up to where he is in Bainbridge. They're reunited in Niagara, and they cross over into Canada and get married, have like 4 kids. They are so influential in the city that they end up settling in. When the gentleman, Dr. Roy Finkenbein, who found all this out for us, was talking to me, he had gone up to the city that they ended up settling in and asked if they had any information on this family. And they pulled out a file folder about 2 inches thick, he said. And they just go, "This is everything we have on the Duncans. Do you know where they came from?" Yeah. They opened up their home to other freedom seekers, helping them settle and restart their lives. And the most amazing part, in my opinion, is when they ran away, George was only 17 and Edie was only 14.
Oh, my goodness.
They're what we consider children today.
Yes.
But they realized they didn't want to be separated. They didn't want to be sold away. And that was very, very likely to happen where they were.
Were we able to find any of their descendants?
Many of their descendants are still living in the area.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. So we're very lucky to know what happened to them. But most of their descendants are still living up in their hometown in Canada.
Wow. And are aware of their background.
Yes.
And oh, my goodness, that would be just, exciting and heartbreaking all in one big ball.
Yeah.
Do we know from his letters or from any of the written documentation about what life was like for a freedom seeker as they were coming through?
We do know some. We're very lucky that George's letter is probably one of the only letters that we have of a freedom seeker while they're still running. He's writing it while he's staying with some people up in Bainbridge. He writes that he's going to stay there for about 2 weeks, that he feels very safe with them. So we know that it's not as much of a quick turnaround as we often talk about, that if a freedom seeker might feel safe, they might settle in an area for a short period or for a long period. There's a freedom seeker who settles right here in North Canton and works on the Underground Railroad for years and years. Both he and his wife escaped from slavery.
Wow.
So it does, but it doesn't. But it does tell us a lot about the secrecy that, even he's not really saying where he's going next after Bainbridge, where the Roaches sent him for fear that something might happen. But it also says a lot about the amount of trust he places in Thomas and Charity. He gives them his real name. When he writes his letter, he goes, "I went by Jake when I came through your home. My real name is George Duncan." And that he trusts them enough to tell them where this very important person in his life is hiding and asking for their help. So it's really amazing to see that kind of connection between people.
You put yourself in their shoes and you think, yes, what a dangerous thing. And you don't want to endanger anyone that you love.
No.
But freedom was so important that they're willing to take some incredible risks.
Right.
And it had a happy ending. That's so wonderful.
We are so lucky to have. It's the best ending we could have possibly asked for.
It needs to be a movie. Work on that.
I've already been tweeting at Lin-Manuel Miranda, telling him to write the next Hamilton musical only with their story.
So, yes. Not a joke. Make that happen.
I think it should happen.
Make it so. Okay. Do we know what life was like at Spring Hill for these people? Where did they hide?
We do have a few places that, according to oral histories, they hid. However, the best analogy that I was ever given was to think of the Underground Railroad like jazz, that you're constantly having to improvise what you're doing. If there's somebody in the house, obviously you're not going to take freedom seekers into the house then. If there's people you don't trust working out in the fields or near a certain building, you're not going to take them there. So it's not as cut and dry and in these little boxes like we as human beings like to compartmentalize everything.
It wasn't, okay, here's your guest room.
Yes.
It wasn't like that. It was maybe a barn one night, maybe an attic the next day,
Right.
depending. It was fluid, I'm guessing, depending on what the situation was.
It's
just keep
very
them safe.
much what's going on. There's a million variables that you have to take into account. Everything from weather to other people being on the property to how long they can even stay. Can they stay for 2 weeks, or do we have to quickly turn them around and get them moving again? So it's like jazz.
I love that analogy. That's so good. Well, you are going to be having a simulation or a tour about the Underground Railroad coming up August 19th. Tell us about that.
Sure. So that's our annual Underground Railroad experience. And in fact, Edie Duncan is portrayed in our Underground Railroad experience. She's on the property, and you actually get to hear her and Charity Roach read part of George's letter. So you get to hear his actual words.
Oh, my goodness.
And that is very biasly, but I try to say this in the most unbiased way possible. In my opinion, one of the best events we do every year. It's a 45 to 60-minute walking drama. So you go through the house or through the grounds as if you are coming onto Spring Hill's property as a freedom seeker yourself. So you'll meet two conductors who are going to be leading you onto your next station. Both of them their stories are taken directly out of slave narratives of the time. And the two gentlemen who play those roles are phenomenal. They're wonderful storytellers, and they are both portraying freedom seekers themselves. They talk about their own time in slavery. We have Edie Duncan. We have another woman who we have named her Sarah, but we have told the story of a woman who did come through Spring Hill's property. We just don't have a name for her.
Wow.
So we tell of her story. We tell why Thomas and Charity got into the abolitionist movement, why they're so passionate about this, and really this very dangerous thing for everyone involved. And it's a fabulous way to explore the Underground Railroad with these people telling you their stories. The other thing that is really amazing is all of our African-American actors and really all of our actors, we're trying to use real people's words as much as possible. So every story that our conductors or our freedom seekers are telling are true stories. We're not making them up. And we're trying to use these real people's words as much as possible. They might not have come through Spring Hill, but they are real people.
Wow. That's just phenomenal. All right. August 19th, and we haven't said where you're located. Where are you located?
We are in Massillon. We are located at the corner of Wales Road and Lake Avenue. And for anybody who's interested, I know a lot of people kind of sometimes get turned off because it's a walking tour, that we have a lot of people who can't make the walk through the woods. So we actually this year are trying something new in our 1 p.m. performance. We'll be seated. It'll be the exact same performance, but it's there for anybody who can't walk through the woods, can't walk up and down the hills, which is phenomenal. It's our first time trying it out, so be gentle with the criticism. But we really want to make this as accessible as possible. And our 11:15 performance, we will have a sign language interpreter at.
Oh, my goodness. You've thought of everything.
Hopefully.
We'll be back with Sammy Kay after these words. You're listening to Our Community.